Hello ladies and gentlemen, and today I will be talking to you guys about the High King of Ireland. Or in this case, the first High King of Ireland. Now I can hear you guys already. Templar, who was the High King of Ireland, or the first? Well, in truth, he actually was born in the year of 941 AD. And, as well, he fought against the Vikings. Who was he, you might ask? This is the story of Brian Boru. Now, I could hear you guys already. Templar, who's Brian Boru? Never heard of him. Well, maybe that's because you guys don't look up anything of Irish history, especially for the month of March. Now, let's first start actually at his beginning. Now, the story of Brian Boru actually begins when he was first a child, and he was sent to a monastery by his father in order to make sure that he was kept safe from the Vikings. If you guys don't realize this, the Vikings would attack anybody, and I could hear you guys already. Templar, why a monastery? That seems a little odd, seeing as though Vikings targeted monasteries. Not these particular ones. In fact, to get into these monasteries, what you had to do is technically climb a giant tower at the time. In fact, these type of towers were, well, a stone figure. It was technically just a big giant stone pillar in the ground, in which it was kind of impossible for the Vikings, especially for that high distance that you had to do in order to climb. No, I can hear you guys already. Templar, they could have just climbed up there. Not exactly. In fact, it was easy for a monastery guard to technically thrust a spear down into, well, a Viking if he's going to climb up the ladder. So it would be pretty much impossible. Now, Brian stayed here for about a couple of years. That was until one of his kin returned to the monastery, and not with good news. At this point in time, it was stated that Brian's father was slain in battle by a Viking. Now, in doing so, he was returned to his clan, or tribe, I guess you might say, during the area of Munster. Or Munster, whichever way you want to pronounce it as, either way. And upon actually returning there, he was actually trained in the Irish ways of combat. The Irish arm lock. Or as well, there was even many others. And as well, they even played a type of game with a stone, not a ball. A real stone. And which would sometimes turn into a bloody brawl. Now, let's also take a look at other parts of the history books, such as the parts in which Ivar then became a king of Ireland. But let's actually go a little bit further into his past. Now, I can hear you guys already. Well, what actually was it? Well, it's actually stated that when it came to a little bit of a angerment dispute between Brian and his own brother. Now, luckily no blood was shed, but it was stated that Brian actually disagreed with the idea of actually making peace with the Vikings, since Brian was wanting revenge for the death of his father. And him and a small group of men in the process left their tribe, and in the process committed into guerrilla warfare. Now, if you guys don't understand guerrilla warfare at this time in Ireland, this was actually pretty impressive. In fact, Brian in the process actually rebuilt the military divisions. In other words, turned it from a light combat military to a stronger military in his timeline. But in his early timeline, with this guerrilla warfare, he actually did something else. Now, if you guys don't understand the armor of the time of Ireland, their type of gear wasn't like the later version. In fact, their type of combat was light armored foot. In other words, a shock-hitting division. In other words, in and out, like guerrilla warfare. Now, what they actually used for weapons was a javelin and a 2-foot sword. Now, that wasn't much, but as well they did use small shields, like a buckler. Small enough that would be used for one-on-one combat. Something the Vikings were not used to. The Vikings were used to unison combat. But as well, the Irish even copied a couple other weapons, such as the battle axe and the sword. Or the Viking broadsword anyways. In fact, these were weapons that the Irish never used in historical times, but in the process, they adapted it. In fact, they made the axe handle a little longer. In fact, for, well, just one-handed blows, especially with a buckler. And they had to try this over and over again just to actually get the hand of it, or used to it. Now, as well, they even adopted the elongated spear that we normally use for thrusting, but they would never actually fully adapt to it. As well, the armor they would have worn would have actually been light combat armor. It would have been a combination of wool, cotton, and including deerskin. Now, in doing so, if you guys might ask, why was this used? Well, this combination could actually stop a thrust of a sword, in which is kind of impressive. Thing is, though, mail was very rarely used. Even any form of plate armor was used. So, you can see how impressive this was for a band of guerrillas to defeat the Vikings who were cladded in mail and iron. Now, in the year of 964 AD, after Brian was successfully defeating the many Vikings in guerrilla warfare, it was stated that none other than Brian's brother had come to ally himself with them. In doing so, he and his brother actually took all of the southern end of Ireland. And by this point in time, their ranks now actually went up to a few hundreds. Now, if you guys don't understand of how big that is compared to the Viking armies, they actually moved with the army in order to defeat the Vikings. In fact, they managed to plunder the lands of Limerick and including parts of Dublin, forcing the Vikings to either retreat or in the process build higher walls. And in the process, this is actually the hilarious thing, actually, what actually happened later. The Vikings in the process kept falling for the hit and run strategy. Irishmen would attack a city, flee into the forest, Vikings would pursue, they were in the process cut down in guerrilla warfare style, which by this day is still impressive and used today. However, at the time, sometime after Brian's brother had joined him, it was stated that a rival chief from the far north, who was allied with the Vikings, in the process, struck down his brother. Now, this was actually very messed up, but what happened later on is that Brian tracks down the killer, and in the process, follows him to a monastery, where he kills him on the spot, beheading him, cutting his head in two, declaring that no one of anything else shall destroy the peace of Ireland. Now, if you guys don't realize this, at this point in time, Ireland was not just fighting the Vikings, but as well themselves. Ireland was never a huge united kingdom. In doing so, it actually fought against itself more than the Vikings, if you think about it. But in doing so, Brian knew he had to change that. And so, Brian unites most of the entire lands of Ireland, either by the force of warfare or by the way of peace. And in doing so, he nearly drives out all the Vikings, all except for the lands near Dublin and the far northern end of Ireland. This is when it's actually stated that the Brian actually was to build his army and navy to a better size in order to defeat the Vikings. And in doing so, he actually still used the hit and run strategy, in which the Vikings, if you guys don't realize, had to use the unison of the shield wall. Problem is, though, in the forest, they couldn't do that. They were fighting one-on-one, and with a Viking, that is certain death sometimes. Now, it is stated, though, in history books that Brian, in the process, is normally named King of Ireland. In practice, this was all but truth at the time. But in the process, though, it's actually stated that Brian even heard that chiefs of Northern Ireland, in the process, united with the Vikings. And in doing so, he actually wanted to fight back. Now, this was with mainly the King of Dublin, the Viking King of Dublin, Silkbeard. Now, in doing so, it's actually stated that Brian had to challenge them, and in doing so, he was declared High King of Ireland, uniting most of Ireland. What happened later on, though, is that at the Battle of Clemmif, I think it was, yeah, Clemmif, it's actually stated somewhere near north of Dublin that it's actually stated that the Viking army from across the seas and in Ireland met with the Irish themselves. And as well, there was even stated to have been many Viking mercenaries fighting for the Irish. In doing so, it's actually stated that upon meeting them near Clemmif, it's actually stated the Vikings and the Irish fought near the shoreline. Now, if you guys don't understand how great this battle was, I advise you to look up the history about it. Now, it is stated, though, that when Brian actually was at this age, he was too old, he couldn't fight anymore, so his son fought for him. And in doing so, he had struck a devastating blow upon the Irish people that had betrayed him. Now, if you guys understand this, it's kind of understandable that if you betray Ireland, and you're betraying your forefathers, so, yeah. Now, in doing so, the Irish in the process defeated the Vikings, cutting them down. In the process, though, Brian's son went up against the Viking king Silkbeard. In the process, even struck him down. But in the process as well, it was stated that none other than Brian's son was slain. All of Ireland then was freed at the time, and soon after, sorry, clear my throat. Now, it was stated, though, that after defeating the Vikings, Brian in the process prayed to God for his great victory. However, it was stated that a Viking king from the Isle of Man in the process tracked down, well, Brian by accident. In the process, he couldn't believe his luck and attacked Brian without a second thought, killing him instantly without him noticing. But as soon as he cut off his head, it was stated the Irish in the process pulled down the Viking king, driving him all to a tree where Brian would have actually, well, had prayed near. And in doing so, what they did is they tied Brian's killer to the tree with his own innards. In which, that is kind of impressive. That they managed to wrap it around the tree 100 times, they stated. Which, I know, gothic, gory, and such, but still impressive. But as well, it's even stated that after Brian actually died, it was actually stated that Ireland fell into a decay of tyranny, and in the process, it technically divided itself again. And in doing so, even though Ireland was free from the Vikings, it was actually stated that the Irish were never to be unified again. Not until the later years of the 1900s, especially during the time of the Easter Uprisings, or including the battles of the IRA against the British government. So you can see why the Irish never were truly united at that time. They were fully divided up until the time in the 1900s. Now, this actually led the way for many kings to take hold of Ireland, such as the British, or should I say the English, as I should say, and as well including the lands of Scotland during the year of 1315, in order to create a Celtic kingdom. However, that didn't end well. But I will get to that more in this month of March, so that way you guys can be prepared for more. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Hopefully you find this interesting. If you guys want to look up more about Brian Bro, I will leave links down below, and as well a little bit of a video to ancient warriors that's actually more historically accurate than most of the things you actually see on YouTube. Anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Hopefully you have a fun day, and as well, my guys, remember to keep your swords unsheathed. Thank you.